Iro meva wa, sutokayo meva wa, supokayo meva wa, anuraktu meva wa, sarvasiddhi mempayatsa sarvakarma sutsame, siddham shriyam kuruhu, ha 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 ho bhagavan, sarvatathagata vajramame mutsa vajrabhava maha, sapa ahum pe. And so then we'll set our motivation. Thinking about how in our lives we inevitably get involved in afflictions. And when afflictions are active in our mind, they motivate us to create negative actions or non-virtuous actions with our body, speech, and mind. And these bring unwanted results now and into the future. And this whole scenario stems from grasping at a solid sense of self and the self-centered mind. They come together. They come together as a pair, thinking that my happiness is so much more important than anyone else's. And so just as this sobering scenario is true for us throughout our days of our lives, this is also true for every living being. And not just occasionally, but throughout our entire day, 365 days of the year. And so the good news is that it's possible to come out of suffering completely, forever. Of course, not without a lot of effort. So let's extend our motivation then to include engaging in this session for, not just for ourselves, but for others. Understanding that just like us, every living being has this innate desire for happiness, wanting to avoid suffering, anything unsatisfying. And so let's set a vast motivation to really apply ourselves to develop clear understanding of suffering and its origins, so that we can help free ourselves and all others from unnecessary suffering and dissatisfaction. So I was asking about the discussion questions, and some of what I heard was that there was still a little confusion about the difference between regret and guilt. Is that true? Yes? Remorse. Oh. Okay. How do you define remorse?
Venerable Tarpa was talking about that as a sort of the group coming back together, and so it's not necessarily my initial phrasing, but if I were to answer the question, remorse is a more heavy kind of punishing of oneself, and regret is more of a clean sadness. Sadness is how I would describe. Regret is kind of a pain in the heart. I think I can distinguish guilt and regret a little bit better, but remorse is still a more subtle line.
Okay. Anyone else? So this afternoon, I thought we'd go into looking at the general characteristics of karma, and that may help to create a further distinction in our mind about, the more we understand about clean regret, then the more we can distinguish that to other states of mind like guilt or remorse. Or remorse is not something I've seen a definition for in the Buddhist literature, so we have to understand the characteristics of things to really have a good conversation about them, but we can try to understand it from our everyday experience or understanding of that word.
Remorse is one of the 5 hindrances, and you can read about it when you read about the 5 hindrances. They have restlessness and remorse. I guess that came up during the Q&A, so not everybody was there. But I think you described it pretty well. You're on your case about it, and it's a mind that maybe churns, and how restlessness just keeps you spinning in a way. Mm-hmm. Remorse can do the same, but it's kind of a heavy feeling. I mean, the way my experience of it is it's not helpful. It interferes with your ability to concentrate. It doesn't help you clear things away. Yeah, and you're kind of hard on yourself for past things you've done. But I would probably want to look it up, see exactly what they said. But that's my
Yeah.
take home on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because one person in the group I was in, we didn't have time to talk about this, but I wasn't sure what they were experiencing when they were describing that. When they felt regret, it carried with them all day long, and it felt a little heavy to me. And I just was like, I don't know, because we talked about this as kind of like a first, when you're first learning this practice, you're kind of learning how to work with your mind. And just like when you first see your faults, it can be kind of hard, but then it gets to be a lot nicer because it's like you're cleaning out this dirt and you're happy that you're seeing them. But it doesn't start that way. And I think regret can be like that too, where we kind of get better and better at discerning what we're doing when we're doing the purification, and we spend less time wasting time and falling into self-centered ways of thinking. And yeah, I think we just learn more finesse and understanding of our minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that analogy of when you put your finger in a fire and you burn yourself, you have regret. Ooh, wish I hadn't done that. But you don't feel guilty about it. It's very clean. It's like you understand cause and effect. And so I was thinking that by going through these general characteristics, again, that we can make that stronger distinction so that we begin to ferret out what is actual regret and what am I adding to that. I think there's a lot of identity in the actions that we do. If we do something we don't feel so good about, then that reflects on me. What are people going to think about me, and what do I think about myself, for that matter? So it becomes a mixed motivation. But the more we trust the law of cause and effect, then I think the cleaner our regret will get over time. Yeah. So let's have a look. So learning about karma means learning how to accomplish virtue and abandon negativity. And negative actions of body, speech, and mind are likened to being moved downstream in a fast-flowing river. Is that how it feels? There's momentum behind it, isn't there? We don't need to make any effort at all. We're carried by our strong habits. Whereas positive actions are likened to paddling against the current. It does seem that way, at least for a while. So the Buddha taught his monastics to reflect on this verse. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abides supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or evil, of that I will be the heir. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? So it's good to keep in mind that just like Newton didn't create the law of gravity and Einstein didn't create the theory of relativity, they observed things. They observed the nature of things. And then they related those to people so that it could be of help to them. And likewise, the Buddha didn't create the law of cause and effect, or karma and its effects. In fact, it was already, as I understand it, it was already a kind of an accepted idea in the Hindu tradition. And so he capitalized on that. I think all religions have some basis of understanding cause and effect to some degree, right? So the Buddha had nothing personal to gain by teaching about karma. He wasn't getting a perk or a kickback or some kind of, something from it. He observed this law from his awakened state, and then he described it as clearly as he could for us so that we could benefit from it out of his great compassion. So whether we're Buddhists or not, whether we ever want to be Buddhist or not, the law of karma still pertains to us. And so we can still benefit by studying and contemplating the laws of cause and effect. It's interesting. I like, when I'm in groups, I like to ask, how many of you believe that what goes around comes around? And most people will put up their hand. There is some general understanding of the law of cause and effect. But if you go very much deeper than that, you lose them, the general population. Because we've not thought about it, that's all. We just haven't been introduced to the more subtle ideas about how it operates. So when we put this knowledge into practice, then we become empowered to stop the causes of our suffering, our self-inflicted suffering. And we become empowered to create the kind of happiness that we want. So think about this as a very empowering kind of understanding or teaching or kind of wisdom. It's a kind of wisdom. The Buddha talked about two types of ignorance, well, many types of ignorance, but two in particular. There's ignorance of karma, the law of cause and effect, which operates on a daily basis, and there's also ignorance of the nature of reality. So both of those we can develop correct views in relationship to, and so that's what we're doing when we're studying about these general characteristics or the more detailed explanation of the 10 non-virtues or the 10 virtues. And it's important to keep in mind that as we go through this discussion that the law of karma and its effects is not a system of reward and punishment. You know, if you plant a seed and you get a sprout, that's not a reward. It's just cause and effect. You create a cause, you get an effect. And also it's important to remember that no one deserves to suffer. You know, we have to be really sensitive about how we talk about karma, especially to people who don't have an understanding of that. Because very easily it can sound like we're blaming people. And there's a lot of that already in New Age thought and different people's ideas. So we don't want to add to that. Nobody deserves to suffer. If someone's suffering, we need to help them if we can. So those two ideas, keep those two ideas in mind. That'll be helpful. The main purpose for studying about karma is to develop some conviction in the law of cause and effect in general. And specifically, these four general characteristics help us to develop confidence or trust or faith in the law of cause and effect. So this is very different than having blind faith in something just because the Buddha said it. But we're actually encouraged to think about this, to actually look for it in our lives, to see if in fact it operates this way. Observing our own mind, observing our own actions, observing our own experience. So the first general characteristic is that karma is definite, karma is certain. And this means that happiness comes from previously created constructive actions. And suffering comes from previously created destructive actions. So you can see how that could easily turn into blame. Oh, I've done this to myself. In a sense, we're creating the results of karma all the time. Usually we only say, why me, when something bad happens. But we could just as easily say, why me, with all the positive experiences that we have right now. The fact that we live in a relatively free country and we have plenty to eat and good education, good health care in general. So when we perform a virtuous or non-virtuous actions, it's like planting a seed, having a particular kind of potential to ripen into a particular type of result. In the Precious Garland, Nagarjuna said, "From non-virtue come all sufferings, and likewise all bad migrations. From virtue all happy migrations, and the pleasures of all lives." So right there, that's giving us a hint that included in this explanation of karma is an understanding of our mind as a continuum that goes from life to life. So that's a little challenging for some people. And we may still have a lot of doubt about that. That's okay. It's okay to have doubt as long as we're working to cut those doubts. If we just constantly have a doubt and we never apply ourselves to learn more about how to cut it, how to develop wisdom in regard to it, then that's when the doubt becomes more of an afflicted doubt. But we'll probably have doubt for a long time, but hopefully doubt tending towards the fact. So just very quickly, very briefly, let's think about how we can prove to ourselves this idea of our mind as a continuum and how it goes from life to life. How many of you would say that your childhood and the way you were raised influences who you are today? Okay, so we can already see that mind is a continuum, right? We've just proved to ourselves. And doesn't it make sense that what we're doing with our mind now will influence what our mind is doing tomorrow and the next day and the next day? Okay, so we can see within this one lifetime that there is this continuity of mind. So then, if we trace our mind back moment by moment, all the way through our, well, it depends where you start, 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, into our teens, into our younger years, all the way back into the womb. There are research studies that show what happens in the womb impacts who we are as adults on the genetic level, level of gene expression. If we went all the way back, if we were able to trace all the way back to the first moment of consciousness. Now, this is also a little bit of a challenging concept, isn't it? There's a first moment of consciousness that enters into the combination of sperm and egg. From a Buddhist worldview point of view, the consciousness, our mind, is a different continuum than our physical continuum. Clearly, our body comes from our parents, sperm and egg. But we have very different minds from our parents. So how do we explain that if we think that mind comes from DNA or sperm and egg? So the idea is that the body comes from its own substantial causes, and the mind comes from its own substantial causes. We've already seen that the mind of this moment influences the mind of the next moment. It's said that the mind of this moment gives rise to the mind of the next moment. This moment ceases and gives rise to the next moment. And it's influenced by whatever we were experiencing. So one way to develop some conviction in this idea of continuity of mind is to observe the continuity of our mind. Like when we do the breathing meditation, that's so instrumental in learning how our mind operates and how it's moving moment to moment. So meditating on the continuity of mind is one way to develop some conviction. In addition to that, there are some amazing books out now by hardcore scientists, psychiatrists and psychologists and people in different fields, behavioral fields, who have done research on cases of children in particular who remember past lives. And particularly Dr. Ian Stevenson and his predecessor, Dr. Jim Tucker, have written a number of books documenting thousands of cases of children who remember past lives. And they have tried to apply double-blind research techniques to these subjective reports, interviewing family members and people in the community. And according to Dr. Jim Tucker, there's a nice YouTube video of him giving a kind of an explanation of the work. And he says, in science, we don't really talk about proving things. We talk about evidence-based. Things are evidence-based. Like, even with medicine, we can't prove that medicine works to heal a certain illness. There's evidence that a certain proportion of people will get well if they take a medicine. And in a similar way, he says, we have enough evidence, hardcore evidence, to that indicates that at least some people can remember their past lives. They're not willing to say it across the board like everyone can do this, but there's enough evidence. They have something like 2,500 cases where everything lined up, all the parameters that they were looking for. And of course they have thousands of other cases that, maybe one piece wasn't corroborated or substantiated. But there are some interesting books out there that you can read. So that's another avenue of, again, building up our own evidence about this idea of past and future lives. Along those lines, we can read biographies of holy beings, like His Holiness. Have any of you read his biography? It's pretty amazing, the description. What is it? Freedom in Exile, I think, is his biography, where he describes, and of course he was told these things, well, he probably remembers them too, but he was told that as a young child, when the search party came into his family's home looking for the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, they were disguised as travelers, and so usually travelers, they didn't have a lot of hotels in Tibet in those days, in the 30s. And so travelers would show up and they'd be invited into people's homes to stay the night and be given a meal. And so these travelers, or the search party dressed up as travelers, were invited into the kitchen, and that's usually where the children were. So that was an easy way to have access to kids in these different homes. And so the young Dalai Lama, he was like maybe 2 years old, 2.5, 3, somewhere in that range. And he went right up to these travelers and started speaking to them in a very high Lhasa dialect, and called them by name, called one of them by name. So there are many stories like this that, again, they don't prove to us necessarily that they're past and future lives, but they are evidence that we can use to have our doubt tending towards the fact. Another thing that comes to mind is that when we learn about some of the results of very strong states of concentration, like developing calm abiding or serenity, there are these 9 stages that serious practitioners go through to actually achieve a very strong type of concentration where you can keep your mind on an object uninterruptedly for about 4 hours at a minimum. That's the minimum for developing calm abiding. Imagine. And with a little bit of effort, these people can develop superpowers, super knowledges. And one of them is memory of past lives, actually past and future lives. They can begin to know some portion of past and future lives. So that can be another avenue of inquiry, to examine that, to understand that. And then also, there are scriptural sources. The night the Buddha attained enlightenment, there are descriptions of him saying that he saw all of his past lives. They appeared, beginningless past lives. How do you explain that? I don't know. But all of his past lives and every detail about those past lives appeared to him as he attained omniscience. So, if we put all of this together and continue working with it, this is something from our own side. No one's going to demand that you believe in in continuity of mind or past and future lives, but it is a pretty important tenet in the Buddhist worldview. And so it's worth investigating, spending some time looking at our doubts and continuing to work with it. I just said a lot more than I thought I was going to say on that, but you get the idea. Yeah. Okay, so here with this karma being definite, or actions being definite, the effects are always compatible or of a similar type as the cause. We don't see extremely different effects arising from one cause. And so we can look to nature to help us understand this internal karma and effects, or cause and effect. Like if we plant a cherry seed, we get a cherry tree, right? We don't get knapweed, thank goodness. We get something compatible. I mean, yes, it's a sprout. It's not a cherry. It's not another cherry seed, but we get something that is compatible to the cherry seed, right? And so we can make many examples like this from the natural world. In fact, I was thinking about how a lot of renowned scientists from around the world now agree about the cause and effect relationship of human-engineered deforestation, agriculture, and fossil fuels having a direct result on production of greenhouse gases, which has a result, related to changes in the Earth's climate. That's cause and effect. We talk about that. We accept that in our worldly view. And so why would our internal world be any different? Or I was thinking in our case, if we smelt high-grade Canadian quartz with blue gem coal from Kentucky and lots of local wood chips at around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, that's going to result in 73,000 tons of isolated silicon metal per year and a little more than 320,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide, not to mention carbon monoxide and sulfur. That's cause and effect. One of the reasons that we're using, one of the strong reasons people are using to oppose the smelter is cause and effect. There will be results from these actions of smelting this quartz in our county. So we use cause and effect all day long in our lives, throughout whatever we're doing. And so we have to ask, well, why would the same not be true of my internal experiences? Right? That's the point. So internal karma and effects is similar. Happiness is also an effect of something. We could infer that the cause must also be pleasant or some kind of positive cause. I was looking at His Holiness's explanation of this in Foundation of Buddhist Practice. And there's something like this. He said, a virtue is considered psychologically and or spiritually healthy, beneficial and ethically commendable. From the standpoint of its cause, a virtue is not produced based on destructive emotions like anger or attachment, and it necessarily gives rise to fortunate results. So it's kind of like a more modern example, or a more modern description. And likewise, suffering. We can infer that suffering too has an effect, is an effect of something. So a non-virtue is considered psychologically and or spiritually unhealthy. From the standpoint of its cause, a non-virtue is produced based on afflictions and destructive emotions or distorted ways of thinking, and always results in suffering. So this is one of the best mind training techniques we have available to us, because following this logic, then whenever we experience suffering or displeasure, dissatisfaction, we can think this is the effect of a cause of a similar type. A negative or non-virtuous cause that was stored on our mind stream as a seed or a potential. And it's ripening now due to conditions coming together. So we don't need to get wigged out about it. We can just kind of accept it very matter-of-factly, at least in theory. That's what we're aiming for. And experiencing happiness or pleasure is always the result of a cause of a similar type, positive or virtuous cause. So you might be wondering why some of the nicest people in the world experience horrible events in their lives. You know, it seems like it doesn't make sense. Wait, this person's really, really nice. They have excellent qualities. What's going on that they're experiencing some of the worst things? And why some of the nastiest, greediest people, we won't mention any names, seem to experience positive things like abundant wealth or fame or prestige. So again, this is why I brought up the idea of this continuum of mind, because to really understand karma, we have to keep in mind this much larger worldview that encompasses a continuum of mind throughout many lives, not just one. Although we could benefit in this lifetime, if we only thought about it in terms of this one life, we'd still benefit. But it's possible that karmic seeds created in one life may ripen in that same life. It's not that common, but most often they're carried on the mind stream and ripen in future lives. So something could ripen in our very next life. It could ripen 10 lifetimes from now. Karmic seeds, many of our karmic seeds that we develop in this life won't ripen until way down in the future, eons from now. How those ripen, what determines all those factors, there are many factors involved in that. That's beyond our knowing, because the law of karma is considered a very hidden phenomenon, or very obscured phenomenon. Some things are manifest; they're very clear. We can see them we can know them with our senses. Some things are slightly hidden. We can come to know them by developing inference. You know, like if we heard a car drive up and we were expecting somebody, we could infer, oh, that must be so and so arriving, because we were expecting them, even though we haven't seen them directly. So we can infer certain things that are hidden, like emptiness. Or subtle impermanence. But some things are extremely subtle, and the workings of karma fall in that category. So they say that only a fully enlightened being knows all the details, all the results of every karma, and all the causes of every result. And so the Buddha told many stories to demonstrate his knowledge about cause and effect. And I find a lot of these stories quite powerful. In fact, I often get chills. You know, it reminds me, oh yeah, get serious. Get serious about karma being definite. But even as ordinary beings, we can begin to understand the law of cause and effect by thinking about these four general characteristics, and also the detailed description of the 10 non-virtues, and also as we have already begun with the four opponent powers. These are some general descriptions of how karma works, so that we can begin to engage with it and employ it in our lives so that it can empower us. So it is imperative that we emphasize that from a Buddhist point of view, karma is not a system of punishment and reward. There's no omnipotent God doling out punishments and rewards in this philosophy of religion. Rather, experiences are just the ripening causes and effects, or causes that were created earlier. And there's no external being who's keeping track of all of our actions. We do that ourselves. Our mind does that. You know, something that's quite apparent to me is that what is it that wakes you up at night? What is it when you wake up 3 in the morning? What do you immediately start thinking about? It's probably not all the good things you did that day. You know, we store these things on our mind, and then they have an impact on us. Although I guess we could get in the habit of waking up and immediately taking refuge, or thinking about the good things we did, or developing loving kindness. We can change those habits. But there's no one keeping score for us. Our own mind keeps score. Our own mind tallies all the causes that we create. And no matter how much we stand over knapweed and pray, please turn into a cherry tree, it doesn't work. So prayer is not enough. You have to take the law of cause and effect seriously. Okay. So again, this mind training is very helpful. When pleasant experiences arise, we can just acknowledge, I am experiencing happiness or something conducive because I carry the seeds of happiness in my mind. And so then we can make a point to create more virtuous actions to ensure good circumstances, relationships, and resources in the future. I remember one nun at Chinrezi Institute saying, "Shall I have dessert today?" Or, "No, I don't want to burn off that positive karma of enjoying a dessert." I don't know that I'd go that far, but you know, if we think about it, if we're going to be enjoying certain things, we're exhausting a karmic seed. We also need to protect the virtue that we've accumulated, like the positive virtue we've accumulated, from being destroyed by anger. One of the most detrimental aspects of anger in our mind is that it damages the virtues on our mind stream. Also, they say wrong views damages the virtue in our mind stream. So we need to consciously create more virtue, even small virtues, and really protect the virtues that we've created. And likewise, in the face of suffering, we can train ourselves to think, okay, I'm experiencing this suffering or this dissatisfaction because I carry seeds of negativity in my mind from past lives. No big story, no big, woe is me, just it's a fact. And thinking, I want to avoid creating any more causes for similar future suffering. And I want to purify my mind. Makes sense, doesn't it? This is really helpful as we go through our day. Maybe there are conditions ripening. Someone offers a little constructive criticism that comes over a little heavy-handed. Instead of getting upset about it, we can just notice, okay, there's a little suffering happening in my mind right now, and I don't need to get too excited about it. I'm suffering because I have seeds of karma in my mind stream, and I don't need to respond, I don't need to react. I can just work with this. I can just accept this suffering and let it go. And then I'm exhausting that seed. How wonderful, I can rejoice and move on. So that's a big part of our practice. So to know and trust these causes requires study. Causes for happiness, causes for suffering. It requires studying the teachings on karma, and also carefully studying our own experience to really have 100% conviction that anger is not going to bring anything good. Anybody have 100% conviction yet? I don't. Or that attachment isn't going to bring positive results. So we might think, wait a minute, is this always true? Isn't it possible to experience satisfaction after engaging in a destructive action? Like the perverted satisfaction we might feel after gossiping about someone we don't like? Isn't there kind of a perverted little sense of satisfaction? It's okay, we're among friends, you can admit it. It happens. Again, I was reading in the Foundation of Buddhist Practice that the way it's described there is that the immediate pleasure we might experience is due to our distorted way of thinking. And the result of this present non-virtue will definitely be suffering in the future. Okay, so be careful about that. Similarly, we may experience some physical discomfort from virtue, like the hunger that we have when we're engaging in the 8 Mahayana precepts. We take them for 24 hours. Or the suffering we might endure going through a Nune retreat. But the long-term results of this action is definite to bring happiness. And in fact, many practitioners find that the suffering, it's not suffering. There's a sensation, you can just experience it as a sensation. Stories from people who've done, many Nunes, they talk about it just really being a blissful experience. So many things can happen as we continue on our path. We also might think it's unfair to experience in this life results from actions that we've done in previous lives. Do you ever have that thought cross your mind? But think about it. Is it really a matter of being fair or not fair? Now, we don't say it's not fair that an apple falls from a tree, and doesn't go up. We just accept that's the nature of things. And so similarly, we can accept that it's the nature of things. No one invented gravity. No one invented karma. It's just the nature of things. That these particular states of mind that we call positive happen to lead to positive results that we want. Generally as a population, we'd say we want them. So again, the main point with this first general characteristic is that karma brings a corresponding result. Positive states of mind and positive actions give rise to positive experiences, and the opposite for negative things. So to the degree that we trust in the laws of karma, we will have a corresponding change in our actions. And this was one of the points that His Holiness was making in that teaching on the Four Noble Truths. He said, obviously we still have some ignorance about cause and effect here, because we still create non-virtues, negative actions. So, we have some knowledge, some wisdom about cause and effect. That's wonderful, and we need to build on that so that we can eradicate all of the ignorance about cause and effect. The second general characteristic is that karma is expandable, meaning that an effect of immense happiness may arise from even a small virtuous action, and an effect of immense suffering may arise from even a small non-virtuous action. So if we look into the nature around us, we can see that from a small pine cone comes a very large ponderosa pine. And not just, a little seedling, but a fat trunk eventually, a fat trunk, and many limbs, branches, leaves, and many pine cones. Not just one harvest, but many harvests for years to come. There are countless pine cones produced. So in this regard, even small causes can give rise to great results. And so the results of our actions can be magnified in terms of the size of the result, the amount of the result, the duration of the result, the intensity of the result from the original action that was its cause. I got a little feedback on Saturday that I talk fast. So if I'm talking too fast, just put your hand up. Okay. And also, many different factors influence the potency of even a small karmic actions, such as the strength of our motivation with which we did the action. That can really influence the outcome. The recipient of the action. We might think, hey, wait, that's not fair. But different people have different, our actions will have different karmic weights depending on the person we're engaging in those actions with. Like, for instance, if we even make a small virtuous gesture towards a Buddha, that can have a very large effect. The fact that we don't know who Buddhas are, how they're manifesting, is a good inspiration to be kind to everybody. Okay, so the recipient of the action, our parents are a strong recipient of our actions. Why? Because they gave us this precious human body. We're a contributing cause or condition to this precious human life that we have. Also, how often we do the action influences its strength. If something is quite habitual, then that can lead to stronger strength of that action. And also whether we're holding precepts when we do the action. So that's another bonus for holding the lay precepts or the monastic precepts or any other precepts we have. understanding this second characteristic is helpful because it prevents us from being complacent or careless about creating small non-virtues, which can bring great suffering. And it encourages us to make great effort to create small virtues, even small virtues. You know, even taking an effort to walk around the Kuan Yin statues in the hallway is a small virtue that will add up over time. So in the sayings of the Buddha, he said, "Do not think a small virtue will not return in your future lives. Just as falling drops of water will fill a large container, the little virtues, the steadfast accumulate, will completely overwhelm them." So that's the good news. It's also true for the non-virtues. I met a woman in Australia who told me about a near-death experience she had. And she said when she was going through that experience, she remembered every action she had done in her life, or at least that's how it seemed to her. And not only that, but she had a sense of how it had impacted the other person. And she said after that experience, she was a changed woman. You know, to really have that kind of awareness of the impact of our actions on others. So, as I mentioned the story about Lama Tisha, he gave us a great example that as soon as he was aware of any small non-virtue in his mind, immediately he started purifying. So, certainly we can do that as well. We don't have to pull out our stupa, we can just have regret. If you have a stupa in your pocket, that's good, but you know, just having regret is enough to mitigate the results, and then to take it to our cushion later that night when we hopefully do our daily recitation of Vajrasattva. So because ordinary beings like us can't see the functioning of karma and its effects, at least not directly, the Buddha told many stories that illustrate the principles of how karma works. Often his chief disciples would ask the Buddha why a certain event happened, and typically he would reply by saying, "You are welcome to ask this question, and I'm happy to answer." And then he would tell a story of the chain of karmic causation that led to these events. Sometimes the stories were quite long, and they would carry over countless lives. You know, you'd have to go back quite a few lives to tell the whole story. And so these stories are recorded in many of the sutras, and also in the Vinaya, the Buddha's teachings on the rules for monastic conduct. So these are available. We can take advantage of them and use them for inspiration. Yeah. So the main point is that we must make effort to avoid even small negativities. So we'll talk about this. We can, if we get to the 10 non-virtues, we'll talk about this. But you know, some of us might, if we've been practicing for a while, we might think that as long as we keep our mouth shut and keep our hands to ourselves, that we're doing okay. We're not harming anyone, and we still let the negative thoughts go in our mind. But actually, we really should check up to see if that's the case. Because the more we understand about things like ill will, the complete path of action of ill will, the more we find that those thoughts have a strong impact. They're creating karmic seeds that can give rise to pretty serious results. So we do this step by step, right? First, when we start to purify, we start with the most obvious non-virtues, the 10 non-virtues the Buddha described. But then over time, we can start to work at the level of mind, really observing what's happening in my mind and countering the afflictions that we find in our mind. And then eventually the most subtle level, of course, is to meditate on emptiness and counter the afflictions, abandon the afflictions with wisdom realizing emptiness. Okay, so the third characteristic is that we will not experience the effect of an action we haven't done. If we don't perform an action, we can never experience its result. If we haven't created the causes to experience happiness, we will not experience happiness as an effect. Even if all the conditions are there. Isn't that interesting? I bet we've all known people who were surrounded by the perfect conditions, but they were miserable people. So it's not just the conditions. We have to have the causes, the substantial causes in our mind as well. And if we haven't created the causes to experience suffering, we will not experience suffering as its effect, even if all the conducive conditions are present. So that's a real benefit. You know, we always have choice. or we can develop more awareness to know that we always have choice. So, of course, we're creating karma all day long. Actually, in just about every moment of our day, we're creating karma. There's a lot of karmic seeds on our mind stream. It's a big job. So it's helpful to keep these general characteristics in our mind. And when we notice that we're experiencing suffering, again, instead of reacting to the condition that's triggering our experience, we can accept the suffering. We can learn and we can practice accepting that suffering, knowing that it's exhausting a karmic seed. That's another very powerful way to think of it. There's a verse from Shantideva's text that I find quite powerful. He says, "Previously I must have caused similar harm to other beings, therefore it's right for this harm to be returned to me, who caused injury to others." Again, cause and effect, not blame, but just cause and effect. Of course it's coming back to me. I have a debt. I'm paying off my debt. Yeah? So there are many events in the world that we can use to try to understand this. If we think about like the bombing of the World Trade Centers, for example, many people perished, of course, and others lived, and they tell amazing stories about why they didn't go to work that day. Isn't that amazing? What a coincidence. Or how they escaped unharmed. It's quite amazing. They obviously had the karma to be linked to the event, but not to be killed by it. We might call that fate or chance or luck, but from a Buddhist point of view, we'd call that karma. Yeah. So there was even a story of a man who was at the World Trade Center, and then he was also in Bali when there was that big Bali bombing. Do you remember that? It was a big deal in Australia. And he escaped unharmed both of those events. So probably we all have stories like this from our own life, where people escaped unharmed in a certain situation. Or maybe we've had experiences where we're sitting at a red light and all of a sudden it turns green and we're kind of daydreaming and we don't press the gas, and then all of a sudden, a car goes speeding by in the lane we were just about to enter. So if we don't have the causes to experience something, we can't experience it. Then the last general characteristic is that karmic seeds do not get lost. They don't magically vanish. So the karmic potencies are seeds created by actions remain in our mind and eventually ripen as an effect when the conditions come together, unless they're counteracted. And a good analogy for that is like a speed camera. We don't have many speed cameras in this part, do we? We do? Okay, you obviously have some experience with that. So it's like we have a little karmic speed camera on our shoulder. Actually, it's in our mind, but, and it's registering all the things that we do all day long, and it leaves an imprint on the film. Boy, that's old-fashioned, on the chip. And it's there until the causes and conditions come together for there to be exactly a representation of what was perceived at that moment. So our mind very much is like a camera. It's capturing everything that we're doing. We don't have that kind of recall now because our minds are obscured, but like the Buddha described his ability to recount all his past lives because all the obscurations were cleared away. And, like that woman who described that near-death experience. All that information is there. We just may not have the conditions to bring it to mind. So positive seeds are exhausted or destroyed by experiencing their result. That's one way to exhaust the seed, or through anger and wrong views, as I mentioned. They can damage the seeds so that the seeds will no longer give rise to their full effect. Yeah. And negative karmic seeds are exhausted or destroyed by experiencing them. So that's good news. We can keep that in mind when something negative happens. Okay, I'm exhausting this seed. That's a really good mind training technique. We also exhaust them by doing purification practices. that render them incapable of giving rise to their full result. And then, of course, we abandon them completely through realizing emptiness. So with this last general characteristic, it's important to check up to see if we have any hangover from our previous religious training to think that, oh, someone's going to take care of it all when I die. It's okay. I'm not really responsible. Or that it means some kind of predetermination in our lives. Karma does not mean fate or predetermination. Yes, there are tendencies there ready to give rise to their result, but we can influence those results by what we do with our mind. So the main point with this last characteristic is that we must intentionally purify our non-virtues and guard our ethical conduct from degenerating, like through anger. Okay, so I find for myself I need to review these general characteristics again and again and again. I can keep them in my mind for a short while, but only to a certain degree. And so reviewing them is a good thing to do. So just reflect for a moment. What would be some of the benefits of thinking about these general characteristics on a daily basis? What kind of changes, what kind of results would come from that?
The more we rehearse anything or what we do, we become. So we really start to take it in. It becomes an integral part of us. So it theoretically, what I'm working toward is it would become more and more of second nature.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I really understood that karma was expandable, I would not minimize the slippery slope of non-virtue that I tend to either conceal or minimize. And the small virtuous things, I would also not think that they're worth doing because they're so small. So this is one of the 4 characteristics that has been the most difficult for me. And so living in community, I've learned to experiment and explore because there are many, many times where the small negativities go out and I minimize them. And the kindnesses I diminish because I don't think they mean much. And so that's one of the 4 that I really try hard to incorporate more into my practice because it's not so much that I see there's some results already. I can see in my mind that I'm a little bit more careful. But I always had a hard time with this one. I just thought the big stuff only brings the big stuff, and the little stuff isn't worth even dealing with. So it's been helpful.
Well, I actually have a question because I don't know if I'm cheating, but I try to be quick. When I am upset, the first thing that you do is say something. So sometimes when I say something, I try to say Vajrasattva humpe to quickly, before it counts. But I don't know if I actually doing it, if that's the right way to do that. I just do that on the daily basis, say something or do something super quick, but I realized that was going to count. So I want to take it away as soon as I can because it's the little stuff. But I don't know if that actually is true.
What is your motivation for saying Om Vajrasattva Humpe? Soon as you're talking about right after you notice some negativity going on?
Yeah, for example, I just, this week, I didn't do something for someone. And later I was like, oh, well, that's my job. If it was difficult to do for me, I should try because it's my job, period. So I create for someone else. Probably anger because that person has to do all over again. And I was like, I want to clean that before it actually becomes. You see?
So it sounds like you have a motivation of regret, and you're doing an antidotal power. You're reciting the mantra. That's wonderful. You got 2 of the 4 powers, and that's going to help, isn't it? Great, thank you.
I think if I was more aware that I only experience what I create the causes for, there'd be a whole lot more contentment and acceptance about whatever's arising in the day. And I could be a lot more calm and not so reactive to what's going on, and then be a bit more clear about how I respond.
For me, I think that if I paid attention to this more, it would help me insofar as I already behave and act with more ethics and virtue than the people around me. So I can sometimes I get a little complacent because, like, compared to people who drink and swear and gossip, it's like, well, I look like a saint. Like the average, but I don't mean that. No, I'm not trying to be arrogant or anything. It's just compared to average people.
I think there's some recognition in that.
Yeah, compared to, and they're like, you won't watch that television show? What's wrong with you? And I'm like, wow, they're killing people on this show. I can't watch that. Yeah, I'm saying that in my head. So I think that if I paid more attention to this, then my standards, it'd be easier for me to stick to my standards, because sometimes it's hard because I'm surrounded by ordinary people, and really I've even had a family member say, "Are you going to become a nun, Maria? Because the way you act," and she was kind of trying to be insulting, but no, really, I mean, it's like when we compare ourselves to those of us who live in the outside world, when we compare ourselves to average people, then we can get complacent, and then we can slip into it's okay to have ill will, or no, you don't even pay attention to that stuff because you're already like doing 100% better than the people around you. This isn't judging. This is,
calling a spade a spade.
Yeah, so then even the slightest ill will that enters my mind, I can't bear it when I keep this in mind.
Great. What about the level of trust that people will have for us? Won't it influence the kind of trust people have for us if we're thinking about these general characteristics and that's influencing our behavior? That's a pretty big deal, isn't it? The other day, one of the monastics was very quiet in one of our meetings, and when someone asked her about it, she wasn't contributing to the conversation. She said, "When there are afflictions in my mind, I just keep quiet." I was like, wow, what a concept.
For me, it's really easy to understand or to see how when we plant the seeds of certain mental habits that those can grow into certain things. So say, for example, you get angry and you're planting a seed of anger, a habituation of anger, that then when certain things happen around you, that anger will flare up. That's what's on you. That's very tangible to me. Mm-hmm. The part that about karma where I start to get I don't understand it at all is how these actions of body, speech, and mind result or don't result in certain physical things. So you mentioned, people surviving horrific events, or like I had just mentioned in the conversation group that we had a teacher recently who got in a pretty bad car accident and not walked away, but was relatively unhurt for a pretty bad accident. Understanding how like those physical external things, like I don't know, there's like a disconnect there for me. I didn't know if there was anything you could say to clarify a little bit how, like, I don't know, to build a bridge for me a little bit.
I can try, but it's probably not going to be as sturdy of a bridge as you want. When we talk about the 10 non-virtues, those are complete paths of action. They have certain characteristics like a basis and the attitude, the performance, and the culmination. Does that ring a bell if you've heard those? So a complete path of action has a lot of contributing factors to make a strong karmic seed, or probably, many karmic seeds in the mind stream. And so each of those seeds, then, they say, has a potential to give rise to at least 4 effects. One is like a fruitional effect. It has the potency to direct our mind to take a kind of rebirth. How does that happen? I don't know. I mean, if you really study the intricacies of the 12 links, you kind of get an idea of, how those seeds are ripened towards the time of death, and how they influence where that mind stream, what kind of rebirth that mind stream is going to take. But as far as anything more detailed than that, I think we'd have to ask a Buddha. So rebirth is one of them. There are two causally concordant results. A result similar to the cause in terms of the habit that we have. So we'll have a habit for doing things like killing, stealing, or the opposite, not killing, not stealing. And in terms of the experiences that we have in our lives. So if we're protecting life, we are creating causes to be protected in future lives, like that. But as far as anything more detailed, I wouldn't be able to say. Also, and then the fourth result is the environmental result. And so how I've heard that explained is it's sure, there are certain environments that we find ourselves living in, but we have some choice about, to some degree, we have some choice about where we live, but it's how we experience the environment that we're in. So those are the four results of a complete path of action. Also, results ripen in terms of our feelings. Every feeling we have, there's a mental factor of feeling that arises with every mind that we have. And they may be very subtle until a lot of them, come together, but every little feeling of pleasure and suffering or pain, dissatisfaction, those sorts of things, well, mental feelings, physical feelings, neutral feelings even, those are the results of karma as well. So karma manifests in, the results of karma manifest in different ways. I don't know if that helps. This is how it's described. Yeah. And we should really try to become Buddhists so that we can know all the ins and outs. How's that? Yeah.
I get tripped up around the same thing a bit, and for me, how I generally try to understand this is with systems thinking, which Ryder also mentioned a little bit ago, because there's simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic systems. In complex and chaotic systems, you cannot really decipher the cause and effect linearly. However, it's still there.
Uh-huh.
Understanding.
Oh, thank
But
you.
when people attribute these events to a simple positive action or negative action that had been committed before, that also to me seem a bit simplistic.
Yes.
Because there are a million things need to happen
Mm-hmm.
for anything, like a seed sprouting.
Yeah.
And it takes a whole universe really for it to happen in either direction.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes the language for me is also misleading potentially.
Yeah. Right, and we do talk about karma in pretty simple terms just to begin to get our head around it, because that's what we can handle. That's what we have the capacity to understand. Yep, Matt?
A lot of times what we may think is good results of karma aren't, they're negative because they end up causing more problems than good. So, and just looking at other people, same thing. Like, we can't, just because we think we would like that outcome, like you're talking about money before. Maybe this person thinks that money's a good ripening result, but it's causing them tons of problems. And they're not going to admit that because they think that money equals happiness, but it really doesn't. So it just puts more of a more complication on the whole situation to even know, what's good and what's bad.
Doing the 35 Buddha practice and the prayers that we recite after and the confession has, I started thinking about how interconnected we all are. And, in it we read, I have created the causes for other sentient beings to be reborn in hell realms and maybe to be even doing non-virtuous things right now that I'm witnessing, and to take some responsibility for that and not think, oh, it's just all them. Yeah. So in my purification practice, purifying for some of that, I see them doing this non-virtue, but maybe at some point, if I believe in past lives or even in this life, maybe I've contributed to the causes for them doing what they're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like made me feel, yeah, just that compassion, taking responsibility, not judging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good point. Thank you. So I would just encourage you to continue thinking about what are the benefits of reflecting on these four general characteristics, and seeing how you can incorporate them in your daily practice or your routine to keep the mind aware of this reality. Okay, so we'll close there.